I hated eating at my desk, but sometimes I didn't have a choice. Today, I took my sandwich out to the park across the street. Needed a bit of sun, you know? Found a bench and started to munch, watching people go by. Then this guy sits down nearby, sketching like he's getting paid for it. Never noticed him around before. After a while, I got curious. That looks pretty intricate, I said, kind of nosy. Just a building, he says. I'm an architect. Sort of in town for a bit, working on a project. We ended up chatting for ages. About his drawings, about my boring reports, life in general. He was funny. Nice smile too. Alex, he said his name was. Before he left, we split my leftover sandwich, which was crazy, considering I barely knew the guy. Something about him just felt different. Next day, back at the office, I'm sipping my usual afternoon coffee when something catches my eye. A napkin, folded up under the cup. I open it, and there's a phone number and a smiley face. Alex's number. My heart jumped like a schoolgirl. I shoved it in my pocket, so fast, like I'd done something wrong. My husband never asks about my day. Just sits at the table, eats, reads his paper. But as soon as Alex's number hit my pocket, I had this little rebellion brewing inside. Now, I was the one with a secret. Suddenly, staying late wasn't so bad. Gotta finish those reports, I'd tell my husband. He'd barely look up. But I wasn't hunched over spreadsheets. It was all Alex. Text messages pinging back and forth under my desk. Nothing dirty, just funny, and flirty, and thrilling. Nothing like the boring silence waiting back home. Phone calls were a risk. Couldn't do it at home, obviously. So I took 2 quick grocery runs, where I'd huddle in my car, voice low, giggling like some lovesick teenager. Hearing Alex laugh on the other end, it twisted something tight in my chest. That feeling, I hadn't had it in years. Then there was the whole guilt thing, but it got kinda buried under the thrill, you know? His exhibit was coming up. He'd invited me, all smiley on the phone. Another grocery run, another lie about needing milk. My heart pounded on the way back to the park where we first met. He was there, his sketches sprawled out. When he saw me, that easy grin, something turned over inside. We talked, but there was this charge in the air, something new. Before I could think, he leaned over. Kissing Alex felt like breaking every rule I'd ever followed. Wrong, and desperate, and oh so right. Busted. It was stupid, leaving my coffee on the kitchen counter. My husband stares at the lipstick mark, his face like a thundercloud. That from Sharon at the office? His voice is low, dangerous. What? Yeah. She bumped my cup. Clumsy cow. Lie tumbled out before I could stop it. Saying it out loud made my stomach twist. Sharon was so sweet. Now she was my cover story. Work parties were the pits, always had been. But now, it was like I was on some secret mission. Scanning the crowd, my eyes locked onto Alex. He was deep in conversation with some bigwigs, probably about his fancy designs. But every few seconds, those eyes would flicker my way, a quick smile playing on his lips. The feeling that shot through me? Nothing innocent about it. Meanwhile, there's my husband, oblivious as ever, rattling on about some deadline stress. Used to be, his goofy jokes would make me chuckle. Now, they just echoed in the room, lifeless. Like something inside him, inside us both, had just shriveled up and died. My phone was a ticking time bomb in my purse. Had to be Alex, his texts always had this buzzing energy to them. Couldn't even look without raising suspicion. Finally, a break. A dash to the bathroom. Frantic scrolling, deleting, my heart in my throat just as my husband appeared in the doorway. Heading home, hun. You ladies have fun. That close. The rush of getting away with it was addictive, but the lies were starting to pile up. The cabin, that was the real game changer. Brainstorming session. Alex had called it, playing it cool. But we both knew this wasn't about blueprints. The whole, girls' weekend, excuse I'd concocted for my husband stuck in my throat. He barely even reacted, engrossed in some work crisis. A little pang of guilt, sure, but it was nothing compared to the thrill of those stolen days with Alex. It made me feel more alive than I had in years, and that scared me as much as it excited me. That cabin. It was a whirlwind of stolen moments. No pretending with Alex, no stifled laughter, no rushed goodbyes outside my office. The kind of passion I'd only ever read about in books, it was mine for those few, impossible days. And yes, that guilt clawed at me. Each laugh, each kiss, felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of my safe, predictable life. The crash back to reality was harsh. My husband, usually a blur of work papers and mumbled greetings, suddenly paid attention. A hand on my back as I passed, questions about the weekend that made my skin prickle. The warmth in his attempts felt like ice. I was drowning in my own deception. The phone call from Alex was the final straw. Seeing that name flash up while my husband watched, panic coursed through me. Hitting decline wasn't enough, the questions in his eyes were damning. Days turned into a fog of forced smiles and hollow replies. My husband still tried for that old connection, those easy jokes, but the air between us was thick with my lies. Every interaction with him felt like shards of broken glass in my gut. The Alex-shaped flame inside was dying, and all that was left was the suffocating smoke of this secret. I'd jumped into the fire to escape the boredom, but now the fire had found its way home, and the only thing left to burn was me. Heart was hammering like a drum solo as I snatched up the phone. Alex's name, glowing on that stupid screen. Could have been anyone, I guess. But that's when Jenny with her big, worried eyes walked past, saw the phone, saw my face. "You okay?" she asked, all concerned. Made me want to hurl. "Fine. Stomach thing," I mumbled. Lies on top of lies. I was getting good at it. But the close call rattled me. It was getting sloppy. At home, that same night, I tripped on the stairs. No Alex, no excitement, just plain old clumsiness and a throbbing ankle. My husband barely looked up from his stupid phone. Graceful as always, he mumbled, barely even a smirk. Like he didn't care if I'd broken my neck. The pain in my ankle was nothing compared to the sting of his words hitting an empty space where concern used to be. Next, traffic jam. Excuse for staying late at work rolled off my tongue real easy. Seemed like I was becoming the kind of person I'd always looked down on. My husband just grunted, eyes glued to his phone. Anger flared. How could he be so checked out, while I was risking everything? The unfairness of it all bubbled up, hot and bitter. The morning of our anniversary was bright, birds chirping, all that crap. The date was printed in big, bold numbers on the calendar we both ignored. My husband was in his usual spot, coffee cup, newspaper rustling, oblivious. My chest squeezed tight. It wasn't even about presents, never has been. It was the forgetting. Like all those years together meant less than some sports scores. That evening, with Alex, the words spilled out of me hot and messy. Something about the anniversary being the final straw sparked a rage I hadn't felt in a long time. I talked about feeling invisible, about needing more, about how my husband didn't even try anymore. Alex listened, nodding, all serious. But those eyes of his, they had a new glint, like a wolf seeing its cornered prey. Back home, the confrontation I'd been building towards felt inevitable. My voice was shaky at first, but then the hurt took over. Each forgotten birthday, each empty, "love you," echoing in my head. My husband was shocked at first, then that familiar defeated look settled on his face. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, voice flat. It wasn't angry, just tired. Like we both knew this whole thing was crumbling around us. The separation was a blur of lawyers and half-empty boxes. Trying to divide a life into neat piles made me want to scream. Went to clear out the junk drawer, the one full of batteries and old takeout menus? Found a crumpled receipt, faded blue ink. It was for couples therapy. Dated a whole month ago. My husband. Reaching out? Trying to save things while I was running headfirst towards Alex? The shame burned hot. All those accusations I'd thrown, all that righteous anger. When maybe he'd been struggling too. Should have talked before. Should have been honest. But all those should-haves were ashes now. Few weeks later, there he was. Outside the grocery store of all places. He wasn't alone. Some woman next to him, laughing at something he said. They looked normal. Not the forced happiness we'd scraped together, but easy. The way he never smiled around me those last few months. A shot of jealousy stabbed through me, followed by that familiar punch of guilt. My new life, my victory, felt anything but. This apartment I'd fought for was as sterile as a hospital room. Alex came over. Sure. Took me out, at first. But the excitement was gone, replaced by nitpicking. The way I laughed, what I ordered, always something to tweak. The thrilling escape was starting to feel like a new set of chains, ones I'd willingly put on myself. Alex's late nights became a new routine. Some big project, blah blah. The excuses sounded as weak as his cologne was strong. This loneliness, this silence I'd wished for with my husband? It pressed on me like a weight. So stupid. Always running from something, never towards something better. One evening, worry nibbled at me enough to call him. Straight to voicemail. That hollow robotic voice telling me to leave a message. Felt like an omen. Tried again an hour later, then two. It was just a gnawing in my gut at first, then a full-blown panic. Where the hell was he? Days later, the truth came like a slap in the face. Mindless scrolling, like I always did to fill the empty hours. And there it was, Alex, grinning that stupid grin, with some woman, all flashy jewelry and highlighted hair. The caption underneath, some BS about new chapters, it crushed me. Called him again. Didn't even try to hide the shaking in my voice. His response? Cool as ice. A business dinner, he called it. Like I was an idiot, like the picture wasn't plastered all over the damn internet. Anger burned beneath the hurt, twisting it into something ugly. Couldn't take it anymore. Next day, marched myself right into Alex's fancy office. The glares from the receptionists, didn't care. Burst right in there. Screaming match turned into choked sobs. He tried to shush me, tried to make excuses, and every word made it worse. Walked out of there with mascara running, all those office drones gawking. It was a scene, but that humiliation? It was the only bit of power left. Every day at work was like walking through a minefield. My brain was mush. One missed deadline piled onto the next, the reprimands from my boss sharp as ice picks. Each mistake was another reminder. I'd traded a boring life for a disastrous one. Money, or the lack of it, became a new kind of misery. That lawyer had cost a fortune and my half of the house didn't amount to much. Had to downgrade apartments twice. The boxes kept getting fewer and the places smaller. Each time felt like admitting defeat, a fresh dose of failure to swallow. Family dinners weren't much better. The pity in their eyes hurt more than any confrontation ever could. Tried to explain myself, but the words came out garbled, even to me. They'd pull back, polite smiles hiding the distance growing between us. Then, of all things, bumped into Greg from my old job, all nice suit and fancy haircut. He mentioned a promotion, a big opportunity. One I'd walked right past while I was getting all tangled up with Alex. The hot flash of regret was worse than any insult. Worst of all was the ache in my chest. Not a movie heart attack, thankfully, but the doctor's explanation made me want to crawl into a hole. Stress, plain and simple. My body was now paying the price for what my stupid heart had done. All of it, a self-made mess I could barely stand to look at. Christmas came and went like a blurry nightmare. Normally, I'd have endured the obligatory family things, at least there'd have been food and fake laughter. Instead, it was me, takeout noodles, and some cheesy holiday movie. Every jingle bell on TV made me want to hurl something. Turns out, being the woman who blew up her marriage doesn't put you at the top of the party invite list. A few awkward pity texts, a half-hearted meetup that ended early, then silence. Each cancelled plan felt like another stone stacking on top of me. Easier to just stay home, shrink into my misery. Then, of all the rotten luck, I ran into my ex. At the grocery store, with some woman who looked nice. Not in a flashy way, but warm. They were laughing about something, the way we never did, not towards the end. That familiar ache twisted into something new: guilt, regret, maybe a little jealousy too. The downward spiral sped up. Late nights weren't about Alex anymore, just about numbing the emptiness. Boxed wine, a bag of chips, and the worst reality shows I could find. It didn't fix anything, but it stopped the thoughts for a little while. Work was the next thing to crumble. No way I could focus with all this swirling in my head. The layoff email wasn't a surprise. Just made everything feel hopeless. No job, no place of my own, drowning in debt. The bottom had dropped out and I was still falling. Next thing I knew, I was packing a suitcase for my aunt's spare room. Cramped, smelled like old carpet, and about a million miles from the life I'd imagined. It was a low point I didn't even know existed. Days blurred together, each one a little grayer than the last. Then one night, I'm scrolling through channels out of boredom and there he is. Alex, the great star architect on some local news puff piece. The grin on his face was blinding, his fancy suit a slap in the face to my sweatpants and stained t-shirt. That same night I never thought I could get any lower, but I did. Desperation made me reach for the phone, My ex-husband's number still in my contacts. Voicemail. That same robotic voice as before. Only this time, it didn't even let me leave a message. Mailbox full, it said. Some pathetic part of me still hoped for the tiniest bit of human connection, but even that was too much. Something had to change. Saw a flyer for a job fair, the desperation stronger than the humiliation. Hours of waiting in line, interviews that made me feel ancient and useless. But, in the end, an offer. Low pay, crappy hours, but a job nonetheless. Not a fresh start, more like a life raft in a stormy sea. The new routine was brutal. Every day a struggle, body aching, spirit barely hanging on. But those first paychecks. It wasn't pride, exactly, more like a primal satisfaction. I was paying my own bills, slowly, but surely. Maybe a stronger person wouldn't need that for motivation, but it was what I had. One night, cleaning out the dusty closet, I found a box I'd forgotten about. Old photo album, wedding pictures, vacations, silly family holidays. All those lives I'd lived before this mess. The tears came then, hot and angry, but also a kind of sadness for a lost innocence I'd never get back. Finally got the nerve to call my sister. Didn't even try to pretend like it hadn't been my fault. She listened, sounded more tired than judgmental. Agreed to meet for coffee, not exactly a hug and a welcome home, but a start. One tiny step in a long, long road. Maybe not to fixing everything, but to figuring out just who the hell I was now. Grocery stores transformed into battlefields. Every trip, I'd scan the aisles, heart pounding, half hoping, half dreading bumping into my ex. And of course, it happened. There he was, alone, looking somehow even more tired than I remembered. It took all my willpower not to drop my basket and run. We mumbled the standard, "How are yous?" That awful undercurrent of unspoken questions buzzing in the silence between words. Then, just as I thought it couldn't get more awkward, he mentions being single, a flicker of something hopeful in his eyes. That night, old regrets reared their ugly heads. Could've, should've, maybe if only. Tempting thoughts that curled up next to the hard, ugly truth. I'd chosen this mess. No matter how dull it had gotten, I was the one who'd lit the match. All the what-ifs couldn't change that. The quiet of my apartment was the worst. That's when the overthinking would kick in. Alex wasn't some great love, just the wrong path I'd taken when I felt trapped. The irony was brutal. My search for thrilling escape had left me with less than I started with. Loneliness, a dead-end job, the shame that clung to me like a cheap perfume. Hardly the glamorous reinvention I'd imagined. What kept me from totally giving up were those paydays. Nothing fancy, but I'd earned them, every damn cent. Slowly but surely, the debt wasn't the mountain it used to be. It was a victory no one would cheer for, a tiny spot of brightness in the wreckage I'd made. But hey, at this point, I'd take any kind of win I could get. Turns out, not everyone at work was secretly judging me. Becky, a woman old enough to be my mom, started bringing in her homemade lunches. One day, she sat down next to me, offered half her sandwich. Started off with work gossip, then got more serious. Pointed me towards some debt counseling program, said she'd done it after her own divorce. The kindness of it caught me off guard. Made me feel less alone, even for just a few minutes. Years passed. Not a fairy tale comeback, but more like surviving a slow-motion shipwreck. Job was steady, if not exciting. Apartment was small, but it was mine. That debt hung over my head like an anchor, though. Every so often, an official-looking envelope would arrive, and my stomach would lurch like it did back when I was hiding things from my husband. The biggest change wasn't about money or jobs, though. It was in my head. All the clichés about, the grass is always greener, and, be careful what you wish for, turns out, those old sayings have a nasty ring of truth to them. I wasn't exactly a wiser person, but I was more clear-eyed, I guess. The whole Alex mess had blown up any romantic notions I'd held onto. Love isn't just fireworks and secret kisses, it's the boring stuff too. The respect you have, the trust you earn, the everyday work of staying together. Will I find that kind of love again? Don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But that craving for excitement, that need for escape that led me down this path, that's burned out. Happiness might be overrated anyway. Peace. A calm night's sleep, feeling like I'm on solid ground again. I'll take that, even if it's not the kind of story you see in